Greetings from the stunning Bryce Canyon in southern Utah. So Utah is truly one of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. But there's a lot more to these landscapes than just visual or natural beauty. The landscape of Utah is more complicated than that. It's a landscape of loss. It's a landscape of forgetting, of erasure. It's a landscape of violence and even a landscape of injustice. And as much fun as I'm having here at Bryce today, I'm actually leaving now to go to other locations where I can explore these other, and I think probably more important, aspects of the landscape. Okay, I have reached the second destination of my trip. I'm not too far from Bryce Canyon in a place called Panguitch, Utah. As you can see behind me, it's mostly open farmland and pasture now. The reason I'm here is because between the years of 1904 and 1909, this was the site of what was called an Indian boarding school. You may have heard something about these schools in the past year or two. These were places where Native families were coerced to send their children, and once separated from their families, the forced assimilation began. They were stripped of their language, their art, their traditions, their food, their dress, everything. It was a cruel and sometimes violent process in which resistance was punished. These schools were operated by the Canadian and US governments, and in Canada over the past 2 years, there have been a number of tragic discoveries of children buried in unmarked graves at the schools. And it is believed that this site here participates in that similar kind of history, that it's understood that there are approximately 12 Paiute children buried in unmarked graves somewhere on this property. I'm not here to tell their story, as it's not mine to tell, but it is important to acknowledge what happened here. It's an important part of our shared history and the Utah landscape. That doesn't make it easy, though. I mean, being here is profoundly uncomfortable. And what's more, the buildings the children lived in are gone. There are no artifacts, there's no historical markers, or any trace of the history, except for this house that might have been an administration building, but even that isn't entirely clear. Although not aware of it in the moment, as I explored the site, I actually started high, but was drawn lower, closer to the ground and further down the slope to the Sevier River. After a while, I found myself crawling over mud and cow patties among the irregular contours of the pasture. After some time, needing a rest, I rolled onto my back beneath the tentative winter sun and realized that for the first time in 3 days, I was warm. The tremendous unease I felt earlier was fading. Lying in a depression in the ground, my images sinking into the grass, I was content. Then it hit me. I had been moving progressively downward to the point where, in a sense, my body was as close to their bodies as it could be. And this brought the old questions back. Do landscapes hold on to their pasts? Can memories or trauma linger in a place? Can the past hold some sway over us or even lay claim to us, even if we're not aware of its doing so? I've reached the final landscape of this journey, and like the boarding school I was at earlier, it's also a landscape of erasure. Because now it just looks like any other patch of central Utah desert. But 78 years ago, things were very different here. At that time, this was actually the site of a small city that covered 19,000 acres and that had many thousands of American citizens living in it. The thing is, the people that lived here didn't come here because they wanted to. They lived here because they were brought here as captives. We're standing on the site of the Topaz Internment camp. And if you're not familiar with the internment camps, very briefly, during World War II, the American government became suspicious or worried about the loyalties of American citizens of Japanese descent. So the US government made the decision to round up tens of thousands of people and to bring them to remote locations like this, where they would live behind barbed wire fences and under the shadows of guard towers until the end of the American war effort. To be clear, these people weren't criminals. They hadn't done anything wrong. After the war, the government moved quickly to remove the camp, and they tore out every single building that was on the site. They took down the barbed wire fences and the guard towers. They took down any telephone poles and electrical lines that might have been here. They even went so far as to dig out the water pipes that had been buried in the ground, leaving us with a site that only contains slight traces of what was once here. Many of these traces are building materials: rotting tar paper, nails, broken pipes, even some tools. But some things are more personal. Arrangements of stone pressed into the ground. A good number of small handmade ponds. Part of a woman's shoe. And as I've gotten to know the site, I wonder about the small moments of living here. How would this frigid winter sunrise have felt looking out from an uninsulated wooden shack? How would they have dealt with the vicious winds that ravaged the area? Who first started working with stones and water? And what would it have been like to look down this road? Even in the 1940s, photographs of converging lines of a desert road had come to describe a uniquely American type of freedom, in which those lines pointed towards self-discovery and unknown possibilities. Now granted, at the time of the camp, this road was lined with buildings, but I still wonder, how would it have felt standing here, knowing that just beyond the point where the lines touched, the road ended at a barbed wire fence?